Hey friends, welcome to the Lioness Den podcast, episode 3. Now listen, if you're a woman of any age, if you are a mother or a daughter, this is not the episode to miss. Let's go on a journey today about boomer mothers, the women who raised them, and how that may have impacted the women of the generations that followed. Now before we get into it, let me tell you what this episode is not. It is not about blaming, shaming, or guilting. Neither is it excusing wrongdoing or bad parenting in general. What it is a conversation to evoke a deeper understanding of how we may have gotten here as mothers and daughters through the last few generations. Let's start the conversation with millennial daughters. The millennial daughters who were raised by boomer moms or Gen X moms. There is something unspoken about that relationship, something layered, something complicated. Many boomer moms were raised at a time where emotions were silenced. Survival came before softness. So during that time, she learned to hold it together no matter what, to work hard and keep everything running, keep the house running. She likely raised her daughter with structure, with advice, with warnings, because that's how love looked to her. But before we get into how boomer moms may have had an impact on Gen X women and millennial women, let's touch on who raised boomer moms, the silent generation women. And if you're too young to really have had relationships with the silent generation women, then it would behoove you to kind of hear me out on this one. These are the women who came before the women who we often talk about. The silent generation mothers were born in the 1920s or the 1930s during the Great Depression. She learned very early on that life was not always safe and that emotions was somewhat of a luxury. And so she endured a lot of discomfort and did so in silence. So these women, being a product of survival, passed on what they knew: strength, endurance, and the ability to keep going even when it got hard. But she also passed on silence, and silence can echo for generations. And then she had daughters, the boomer daughters, and these daughters likely did not hear "I love you" often. Many boomer daughters learned to express themselves, but within limits. They strive to achieve, but also to please. They lived through the feminist movement. Some accepted it, some rejected it. And I'll briefly talk about where I fit into this scenario when pertaining to my relationship with my boomer mom and my silent generation grandmother. Before I do that, let's talk briefly about the millennial daughter. They're the young women that came into an age of therapy talk and let's unpack that, in an age of more vulnerability. I mean, think about it. Millennial women grew up between tradition and self-awareness, between being grateful and speak your truth. Millennial women grew up wanting what they may or may not have received, which is connection, emotion, validation. I personally don't think that the disconnect between generations has anything to do with music or technology, but more the emotional language. Boomer and Gen X moms weren't able to name their feelings. So when their daughters did, they didn't quite know what to do with it, if that makes sense. Let me give you a personal take on this entire conversation. I am what would be considered a late boomer, early Gen X. I was born in 1964, so I literally sit right on the fence of a boomer and a Gen X. My mom was born in the 40s, and she is an early boomer. So technically, because she had me so young, we fell in the same generation. My grandmother was born in the 1920s. She was of the silent generation. and I raised a millennial daughter. Now, because my mom was a young mom, I was around my grandmother well into my 40s. She didn't pass until I was in my mid 40s. So that gave me an opportunity for most of my life to observe the relationship between my grandmother, my mother, and how close my grandmother and I became as a result. My mother and I were close, but not in a soft, nurturing way. You know what I mean? It wasn't built on shared emotion or hugs or that type of connection. What I learned, my grandmother being from the silent generation, she raised my mom to not show love in touch or words, but through duty, through making sure everything was done, get the bills paid, go to work, take care of the kids. And that's how they showed love. So, in turn, my grandmother did not say, I love you to my mom. She was completely uncomfortable saying, I love you to us. So, I didn't hear it. Interestingly enough, I didn't feel unloved, if that makes sense. I knew that my mom loved me through her actions, but did I hear the words? No. As a caveat, for the longest time I called myself a boomer because that's where I thought I fit. I fit more in the Gen X generation in terms of just who I am. I'm more of a softie, I would say. I've always been a hugger. I've always been very emotional, and I've always worn my heart on my sleeve. I'm very affectionate, and I'm comfortable with saying I love you. I've always said I love you to my kids. In turn, however, there was a time where my daughter came to me and expressed that I wasn't as loving and nurturing as I thought that I was, and that some of what I got did carry over despite my best efforts. And I think where that came from is there was kind of a layer of security that I carried around. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but I wasn't being fully myself. And that came from how I was raised. And my daughter felt that. And I validated that for her because there was a lot of truth to that, to what she was saying. Speaking of which, I will be having my daughter join us as a guest in the coming months. And we will explore our relationship, me being a Gen X slash boomer and her being a millennial, and how she experienced me and how I experienced my own mother, how that translated over to my daughter. But I want to say something really important here and how I found peace with my relationship with my own mother. And it wasn't through me wishing my mom was someone else or trying to go back and change the past or blaming or shaming. It was through one real conversation, me and my mom, and that was 2 years ago. And it shifted everything. It gave me an opportunity to express how I truly felt about not feeling that real closeness that I always wanted. And it gave her an opportunity to explain to me where her parenting style came from. And through that was a lot of healing. And if you're a daughter listening to this, maybe you felt that. Maybe you felt the emotional distance, unspoken expectations, or that love was earned through behaving and not something received by just being. Or as millennials, you might be setting strong boundaries with your boomer or Gen X mothers, or feeling angry because no matter what you do, you're not getting what you need. So if you're listening and you're thinking about your mom, whether she's still here or not, just know you don't have to excuse her mistakes. Appreciate her effort. And it's okay if you're still figuring it out. I mean, millennial women, you are the in between generation, raised by women who weren't allowed to feel, but becoming women who do. As you can see, there's a lot of beauty in generational reflection. It gives us a chance to look back and move forward at the same time. So, if this episode resonated with you or touched something in you, maybe you'll be able to look back with a little bit of understanding and a little less blame. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Whether you're a mother or a daughter, just know that as long as God gives you breath, it is never too late to say, I'm sorry, I love you, I forgive you, or I wish I had done things differently. It's never too late. All right, until the next time, bye.